streaming at KUHSdenver.com. Good morning, I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman of 360 Performance every Friday at 11 a.m. We're here rocking with you, trying to get some technology together. We will share with you what we need to know about recognize, begin with the end in mind. That's what we're talking about today. That's our topic, beginning with the end in mind. And we're gonna share with you some thoughts that have come through the news this week, but we're also going to share some thoughts about what's been going on all over our world, not just our communities in this here United States, but all over the world. And we're going to make sure that we start putting some understanding to it and some process so that we can be aware of what is important to us, so that with that important understanding we can do our best at being our best. So we've got two characters. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is Coach Lute Olson. He's near and dear to my heart. I'll explain that to you. And then we're going to talk about one of the key leaders in sports today, not only as a coach, but also when he was a player, and now in the midst of all that's going on, he rose up and became the voice of reason. And that was Doc Rivers, the head coach of the LA Clippers. And beginning with the end in mind is our theme for today. Once again, I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman. Coach is what they call me. That's what I try to be to people, about connecting the brain and the body so that we move together as a collective, but with the awareness that each individual needs to have for the people around them. Well, for me, I began with the end in mind many years ago, not knowing that that's exactly what I was doing, but with great mentors and leaders like Dick Schultz, who was my basketball coach at Iowa, and then it was Lute Olson my second year. Well, I must, sadly, but life is harsh and life is rewarding. And Coach Olson has had a lot of rewards in his years. He's now in hospice care. He was in the hospital. He was put in the hospital because he had a stroke. And I want to reach out through this medium and connect with him and his family and say, I'm grateful for all the things that Coach Olson gave to me as an individual, as a player, and as a person. And I'm going to share a little story with you about how he did that. You see, back in the day, in the 1970s, 73 to be exact, and then in 1974, when I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa, I had to try out because I was a walk-on. My freshman year, college basketball players don't get scholarships. They got letters of intent. But we were also able to work. We could get jobs. That's not the case anymore because when I keep the amateur status, well, for me, just going to school and paying for my tuition was where my focus was, and any means necessary. So in my love for basketball, I walked onto the Iowa Hawkeye team as a freshman a year before Lute Olson took over as head coach. But one of my jobs was mowing the head coach's lawn, Coach Schultz's lawn. And every time I mowed his lawn, there would always be a plate of chocolate chip cookies, a pitcher of lemonade, and a glass with ice in it, sitting on the concrete patio. And I never saw it coming. Literally, I never saw it coming. Coach Schultz his wife was like a shadow, an elf, if you would, because I never saw her, but it just appeared. Now, as I extended my stay at the University of Iowa in basketball, Coach Olson took over as the head coach. Well, he knew he had some young players who were walk-ons as well as freshmen who were going to be now starting their sophomore year, and the rules in the NCAA were changing. We were going to get breakaway rims. The three-point line was soon to be literally applied to the court for NCAA basketball and the Big Ten. So Coach Olson had individual interviews with each one of his walk-ons, and the interview was more like a physical workout. Coach Olson, back in the day, we were in the Armory, so the court was right outside of his office. Literally, he could just walk out a step and there was the court. So I met with him, and he put me through the motions, and one of those things he had me do was to the points he made about what he wanted his point guards to do. He wanted his point guards to attack the basket go into the jungle of the giants underneath the rim and attack the basket, knowing they were going to get beat up. It's the Big Ten, after all. And try to convert a layup, but more importantly, get fouled. Clock stops, strategic thought there, and as the name says, you get a free throw, a foul shot. And so he wanted his guards to get to the rim strong, convert if they could, and then make their foul shots. Well, getting to the rim was easy for me to do, but Coach Olson believed the stronger physically the player, the point guard, was to get at or above the rim, increased the probability that the basketball would go in the hole, even if the player was knocked off his course, but he was up high enough and close enough that there was a good chance, high probability, that the ball would go in the hole. Well, Coach Olson wanted to see how high I could jump. Well, at the time, I'm 6'2", and I'm barely reaching 6'2", as a 17, almost 18-year-old. And I did it, both hands, got up to the rim, one step, drop, and jump. And then he wanted to see if I could get to the hole with both hands. Because left hand, right hand is one thing, but your body going up together with both hands is a whole different situation. Well, I passed those tests. And as much as I'm going to perhaps regret saying this, it doesn't impugn Coach Olson at all, but he knew that the league and the conditions of the league from a physical, emotional, and community standpoint were changing. This was the University of Iowa, after all. It was only 10 years after a huge change happened in Texas. And we'll talk about that a little bit, with an all-black starting lineup going to the Final Four and winning the NCAA championship. It was only 10 years ago. So the look of teams were changing. The recruiting of players all across the country was changing. So he said that your skills are strong, but you may not be from the right neighborhood to make it in the league that's coming. And at the time, I didn't know what he was talking about. All I knew was that something was changing. And it was changes from generations of differences that were coming together and perhaps clashing with one another. And I wanted to make sure I understood it. So as I did that, I sat with my teammates. I got on the team. I walked on the team again. I tried out and walked on the team again. And I was sitting with two of my teammates, EJ and Eric, both from different parts of the country. Both were black men. One was from Philadelphia. The other one was from New York, the Bronx area of New York. I don't remember where. But one of the conversations we had as freshmen was in getting to know each other as we sat on the sideline waiting for our turn to go in and play against the varsity squad. Because back then, there was no freshman, sophomore teams. It was just JV and varsity. And so we tended to play against varsity smaller colleges, Division II, Division III schools, because many of the Big Ten teams did not have a JV squad. So I was sitting on the sidelines, and Eric and EJ, we were probably a couple of weeks into the season with practice and what have you, and they asked me, he says, well, what do they call you? What do they call you? And I'm an Iowa A seed. I have no idea what that means. What is that short for? I didn't even think about that. I didn't know if they were abbreviating something. And one of my teammates says, they want to know your nickname. And I said, oh, they back home they call me Whitey. Well, after the laughter, they were rolling on the sidelines, laughing. Now this is 1973, and I was truly wet behind the ears. I did not have any idea about who I was as a white man, who I was as a white basketball player. I just didn't know that. And after the laughter subsided, Eric said to me, he said, man, I'm never calling you that. There's no way I'm ever going to call you that. So we continued on, and I had more hey yous and what's up and pass me the ball instead of a nickname. But time went on, we got to know each other, and in the locker room and in more private sessions amongst the teammates, my nickname started to grow on them, because after all, I was Whiteman. I was Whiteman. And so Whitey just seemed to be the thing that fit. So we used it as a weapon to distract other teams. It worked on a game against a Division III school. When Eric would call me out, we would do a run down the floor on a fast break. Eric would be on the same side of the ball with me, and he would say, he'd clap his hands and, Whitey, Whitey, Whitey. And that was for EJ then on the opposite side of the court to break to the basket, and Eric would pitch a ball up in the air for EJ to grab it and lay it up. Well, we did that against the varsity. And the varsity got irritated at us because they stopped playing defense when they heard Eric say that and call out my nickname. And we knew something was going to happen. Something was going to be altered in their performance. We didn't think they were literally going to stop playing. Well, as I have fond memories of those interactions and understanding each other, I think about today and what's going on today with the conflicts that are happening around the country, and what, if anything, is laughable about what's going on, and what kind of changes are we going to make. Well, my teammates made changes. They changed by getting to know me and understanding who I was and feeling comfortable with the nickname that in 1973 and 1974 not only caused players to hesitate, but many of them, they didn't know what to do with it. They basically, because of the ignorance, left it alone. Well, we are definitely more enlightened these days. But are we really? Do we really remember what has gone on over 40 years ago? And really, that major change and that conflict in 1965 and 1966 at Texas Western, when Dan Haskins was the first-time men's basketball head coach at a college level. Prior to that, Haskins was a girls' high school basketball coach. Now, coached championship teams, but Texas Western was in a desperate state, and they thought they could get by with a cheap entry of a new head coach. For goodness sakes, Dan and his family lived in the dormitories above his ball players. But that wasn't a conflict anywhere near what Haskins faced later on in the season. They played my alma mater, the University of Iowa. Their season was a 28-1 seasonal record. The one loss was at the last game of the season because the players were basically boycotting, still playing, but in their minds boycotting the behavior and the social unrest that was being put upon them as players. Now, a long story short, they went on to win the NCAA tournament, beating Kentucky. And that in itself, an all-white male basketball team playing an all-black starting lineup basketball team, was what created conflict. But conflict that was precursed by many incidences of teams having to be housed in subpar conditions at hotels, or literally being turned away, or one of their ball players being beat up in the bathroom at a restaurant they thought they were being served. But white patrons got up and went into the bathroom and followed the ball player in and beat him up. Those are incidences 40 plus years ago that seem to be ringing true today. But what happened to the change? Well, Texas Western then won the NCAA tournament. And in winning, it seemed as though things were changing. But interestingly enough, voices were not loud enough about what happened after the NCAA championship win. Texas Western, typically NCAA champions were invited to the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, for some of you, you may not even know what that is. I do. That was a big deal. That was like getting on Johnny Carson or Jimmy Fallon, The Tonight Show. That's the equivalency. Well, they weren't invited. Ed Sullivan didn't invite them. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know for sure, I'm now curious about whether or not Ed Sullivan even was aware that his producers in the network didn't do that. Now, after the fact, I'm sure he was. It's a shame that that happened and their voices, somebody's voices, were not heard. In addition to that, when they ended the game and won the championship, what's the tradition? Coaches, staff, players, they get on the ladder, they cut off a piece of the net until the entire net's been brought down. And they all get a little token. Well, the operational staff at the stadium didn't bring out a ladder for them, made it difficult, if not impossible, to cut the net down. Well, they adjusted, they adapted, hoisted one of the point guards on the top of the shoulders of a 6'8" center, and they did it themselves. They took charge like they did all season long with a 28-1 record to win the NCAA championship. Well, here's some other changes. Remembering the Titans, that was when there was a conflict of integration was happening in schools. Black athletes were being bused over to white schools. White players, black players are having to get to know each other. Well, the head football coach was left with this situation, and yet he was a competitor. He was used to being a champion, both in his own mind as an individual player as well as a coach prior to going to this high school on the East Coast. But it was a change, and it resulted in more changes, more awareness, more understanding, more talk, more rhetoric. It's a constant in any sport I've ever coached or ever advised that communication, both on and off the field of play, the court of play, is essential to managing not only the competition, but any conflicts, any obstacles that you might incur, so that you can adapt and adjust. How quickly you do that is called resiliency. How resilient are we today? Another change that's been happening over the years is captured in a documentary by Chantal Hansen, the director and producer of that documentary, called Her Turf. Well, that documentary is about female football officials and them utilizing their skills as good officials. And if you watch the documentary, you go onto YouTube, you can see the teaser for it and listen to the wonderful officials that were in that were captured in that and highlighted in that film. They make a very good point. Don't look at me as a female who wants to be an official. Look at me as an official who wants to be good. And then there are other icons in sports. Billie Jean King is one of them that brought to the forefront the economies of scale in the payouts to female athletes. In this case, women's tennis. It's interesting that that conflict occurred for equal compensation, and yet we are many, many years past that, and we're doing it again with our USA women's soccer and the WNBA. Now, I am very pleased to have met and know the director of the WNBA PA Players Association, and that they recently, as of June of this year, renegotiated a better contract that reflects them as players, not as female players, but as players, so that the game of basketball played by women and men, when it's looked at the at the operational level, there's a sense of equality and balance in that examination. It's really interesting to me that all of these conflicts for all so many years, 40, 50 years worth of conflict and modest change, and yet underlying that, like with the Texas Western team, there were still elements of treatment that we didn't speak out about. So did change really happen, or was it just superficial to shut people up? In the documentary film, Her Turf, you have some wonderful stories about female professionals, officials, that they are charged with knowing the game as good or better than any of their peers, male or female. And yet, they run into conflict with coaches along the sideline. when you watch the documentary, you'll see and hear coaches confront the officials, these female officials, as to why they're making the call. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And they make comments like, ma'am, you need to check with the white hat. Well, not only is the white hat the lead official, but in this particular example, when you watch the film, it's a man. So it's, ma'am, check with the man to make sure that you're right. Because I don't think you are. You don't know the rules. So the conflict seems to be unending, but what's really great about that documentary is it points out that there are allies to doing it right and making sure that the right resources are selected for officiating games of consequence. Now I say it that way because I'm wondering, do we have the right officials at the game that has consequence so that we make sure we have the right officials to give us a fair and reasonable assessment of the consequences of our actions? Recently, within the last few days, less than a week ago, truths have been spoken. Truth through actions as well as through words. Those that we rely on to protect us spoke truth that many of us have a hard time accepting. And one of my coaches that I admire is Doc Rivers, the head coach of the LA Clippers. And Doc had this to say: "It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country and this country does not love us back." Now look, I'm a parent, and for those of you who are parents out there, you can relate to educators and coaches because many of them have your kids under their care longer than you may have them under your care, based on the nature of what they do. So Doc Rivers has a vested interest in his remarks because he's a black man. He's a father of black men. His father, Grady Rivers Sr., was a lieutenant in the Chicago police force. Doc has a frame of reference that needs to be respected and understood. How hard is it for you to love someone or something when you are constantly getting pushed down, pushed around, beaten, and regretfully killed? And yet you and your family still come back with a desire to be wanted and loved. It sounds like a battered syndrome to me. We need to stop the cycle of that behavior. If we're going to truly officiate in situations that have dire circumstances, if we don't do it right, we need to take charge of that. Here's some other thoughts about a sense of community. Now, the NBA, they have a community. It's in a bubble. And they have decided, and they may get back to play this weekend. Still not quite sure if that's been said definitively. But here are some thoughts from some other, well, I'll give you another quote from Doc Rivers. And this is a good one. All you hear is Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones who are denied to live in certain communities. If you were sequestered in this bubble in Florida, and your children and your family members were home, and this was happening, and you are from Milwaukee or Kenosha or Antioch or Chicago, any place close to that unrest, or any place near Portland, how safe would you feel? As a coach, how could you believe you have the attention of your teammates, of your players, when this is going on? It doesn't seem unreasonable that boycotting was something to do. LeBron James says, it's what we've been talking about, and it's what we're going to continue to talk about. Having two boys of my own, and me being an African American in America, and to see what continues to happen with the policy brutality towards my kind, continue to see what goes on with the injustice. It's very troubling. It's very troubling, said LeBron James. Now look I've watched social media for the last few days, and you can have your opinion about LeBron or Doc Rivers or any number of ball players or athletes, professional athletes, that are joining the boycott, and whether or not they're sincere or they're legit or they're just jumping on the bandwagon to be part of the group. I don't want to go to that place. That's in itself a conflict. I want to be able to see us play, continue to play, and do it with a sense of safety, security, and freedom. But we have to listen. There are those on social media that are saying, well, they're just jumping on the bandwagon. What is this? One day of boycott? What is that? They're just making press for themselves. They're getting paid way too much money to mess around with this stuff. Now, there may be a degree of truth to that, but let me tell you something. In the media business, anytime you get eyes on something or ears on something, you've made a mark. Every person that's a naysayer that gets somebody else looking at the thing that they're not liking, it gets looked at. It gets eyes on it. What I want to make sure we're doing is, with all those eyes, good or bad, as some would say, any publicity is good publicity. What I regret is it's issues like this. 7 bullets in the back of a man going into his car with his 3 kids in there. That's the issue. The knee on the back of somebody's head who then dies. That's the issue. It needs more eyes on it. It needs more words to be said about it, good or bad. Just keep talking about it so that we can get to some resolution. There's some people who are doing some resolution on it. The boycott of the basketball players, they started it. They're in their bubble, but they said the words, they spoke up. And then you have Major League Baseball. They also spoke up. I don't care if it's 1 game, 2 games, the rest of the season. It's bringing a voice to the problem. It's bringing awareness to kids who watch these ball players and see them now doing what is right. It allows them the freedom, because they're Americans, to go out and protest in a free, safe, peaceful way their opinions about what's going on and what is not right. Especially in the towns where it's really affecting not only the sports, but the people who are the fans of those sports. I want resolution quickly, because I want to see the fans back in the stands. At Milwaukee, in Portland, LA, Denver, Chicago, wherever it is. But I will not refute or deny anybody the right to peacefully demonstrate so that we can end racism and end the inequalities across all gender and population, whether it's wages inequality, social injustice, racism, whatever it is. We are better than that. And here's what's happening. If you listen to what's being said in this country, start realizing that it is a world response. It's not just hockey and baseball and basketball that's boycotting. It's international sports at any gender. You have USA and Canadian Olympic women's hockey that is doing this. You have world hockey organizations, world soccer organizations catching the message and grabbing it and moving. This is why it's important. Taking great action on something that influences all of us. I'm going to take a bit of a pause and share with you some thoughts as you, for those of you who are watching and seeing this, remember that here at KUHS, we stream all kinds of sounds and visions and images to you about all kinds of issues and messages. But one of the things that is constant from everything we do is that it's listening to you and how we present it. The stream, KUHSdenver.com. Glad to be here. Every Friday, 11 o'clock, 360 Performance. I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman, Dr. Whiteman, or Coach for most of you who work with me. I love doing what I'm doing. If you have a question for me, check me out on 360mindset.com. That's my website. Get your fingers working, punch it in, and share with me your thoughts and your questions. This is a tough time for me because I'm not getting the same kind of interaction with my athletes as I normally do. In fact, I'd rather not have this interaction. I'm getting conversations about, hey, do I talk to the press or not if they approach me? I said, it's your call. Let your heart and your mind guide you. But when you talk to them, be real, be legit. Speak with a voice that represents who you are. Use Doc Rivers as your example. For me, I reflect back on the coaches that influenced me, like Coach Olson. I wish you well, Coach. I wish you well. People like that help guide us when we need a moment. So take those moments and take a breath. But know that this is not just about the United States of America. It's about our world and how we interact with one another, how we share and talk with each other. There is a world response. Don't be naive to think we're in a bubble like the NBA players. The NBA players know they're in a bubble, but know they can still speak out about what's the right thing to do. And they're doing that. We're doing it, and we need to be aware of the essentials of who we are as human beings. That love and respect for everyone will move us down the path, but also remembering that we're not alone in this. Love is not a unique thing just for Americans or just for Denver. It's a universal given for us as human beings. We're not in this by ourselves. We have freedoms that we need to make sure we're aware of and recognize that not everybody around the world has an equivalency of the same freedoms. And yet, they're in a better place than we are when it comes to the health emergency and how we're treating each other. And that's not an opinion. There are numbers that back up what I just said. In countries where their limitations to free speech are constant and heavy, we don't have such limitations, and yet we are still behaving in the way we're behaving. We are not resolving the conflicts. We are not creating safety in our communities and our environments. And yet, we espouse, in the last 2 weeks, we've espoused land of the free, home of the brave. But what does that really mean if we don't have the respect for one another and the humility and integrity to deliver the same equally to everybody? Peaceful demonstrations are a key component of who we are as a country. It's what people died for. But the people dying these days are being told through the violence that they are not entitled to the same respect. I agree with Doc Rivers. I see the fear. I feel the fear, but I do not have the entitlement to the same fear that Doc Rivers and LeBron James are feeling. I don't know what that is. Quite honestly, I don't want to know. But because I am who I am and how I grew up, white privilege has put me in that place. I've talked to friends of mine about white privilege and my frustration for it and what I can do. I've talked to my ball players, and what they have said to me is just be yourself, coach. Just be who you are, that we know is there for us. It's tough to do. And it's tough to be watching what's going on when you know that you're not the right person to support or interject yourself into it. But I am ready to support my players when they need me to be there for them. The tug of war that's going on right now between communities and law enforcement, or law enforcement and administration, that then has created another tug of war, or lengthened the rope, or made the pit bigger, that you might be pulled into because you lose the tug of war, is the politics. I want the simplicity of this tug of war, that this is the only tug of war I want to see, with the smiles on their faces and the enjoyment that competition can be appreciated in handshakes and smiles and pats on the backs between both teams can end the contest, regardless of the level of talent. It's a tough world, regardless of the injection of any tugging and pulling and pushing. Regretfully, the rope in the tug of war between kids is now a gun, or it's tear gas, or it's a Molotov cocktail. Maybe if we were to replace those things with a rope on the street, the peaceful protesters would walk by, continue to protest, and those who want to have conflict and be physical about it can pick up the rope and see who wins. It's not that simple, is it? But that tug of war is the only one that I want to see. It's the only one that I want to hang around to. Let me come back to what started all this, which was talking about beginning with the end in mind. Doc Rivers, LeBron James, and others, their beginning a few days ago with an end in mind was the concern and fear they had for themselves and their families. And that black and brown people are literally targets for some people in this country. I'm not going to say law enforcement, because you know what? I've got family members who are law enforcement agents at many different levels. I respect law enforcement agents. I understand that within any group of people, there isn't always a consistency of a high level of quality behavior. But we can change that with training and practice and simulating what's right and what's wrong. I'm not sure, because I'm not there, but I'll ask the question of my audience, and you can ask others who are in law enforcement, what is the training? What are the financial resources that support your ability to deliver training? Or is it just sign up here, go there, get your uniform, put on your gun and your mace and your taser, and you're ready to go? And you can learn on the job as you go along. we have differences from one community to the next about the standards of behavior for law enforcement. That's not me saying it and making anything up. That's a reality. Law enforcement agencies across the country and at the state and federal levels have been asking for some uniformity in principles of conduct and training that conduct across all 50 states within every law enforcement agency. Why aren't we there? Other countries have succeeded at doing that. We've talked about South Korea many times. They're there. Why aren't we getting to those places so that when we define my metaphor of tug of war, it's easily and simply defined? And the rope and what the rope represents is easily defined so that I know what I'm grabbing onto and what end and what team I want to be on. And I also know the consequences. If I don't do my job, if I don't perform, I know what I'm going to fall into. I know what the mud is going to look like on me. Beginning with the end in mind. What is our end in mind? Doc Rivers, the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball. I'm sure I'm forgetting. WNBA is also part of that. They're very sensitive to what's going on in our country. They're doing the necessary things at the Player Association level to communicate and send the messages. Very, very impressed with the Milwaukee Bucks and their ownership and administration and leadership, coming out very quickly, supporting their players and their need to take a break, take a breath, and boycott. Every team at every level within the team sending a message to their coaches like Doc Rivers and others that they are there for them, they support them. And I hope that everybody who posted something negative that sounds like, well, they're just in for a press day, 1 day of boycotting, what is that? I hope anybody who says those things, you get a clue that one time is enough, but many times is even better to bring attention to this. So you can send any message you want. Send a negative message, but keep promoting what caused you to make that negative message. And maybe, your mind will switch over and you will understand what it means to be afraid. Not like LeBron James or Doc Rivers, because you'll never be there if you're a white man. If you're not of color, you don't understand it. And if I sound like I do, I don't. I have understanding based on empathy and seeing it firsthand and talking to players who feel it on a daily basis. All right, next week's shows. I got a lot of stuff here, so I'm going to take a little bit more time than I normally do at the end of the show to share with you what's going on next week. Some really great stuff. We're going to bring some firsts to you. And one of those is a look at a new cloud-based platform called The Labs. So check it out. The Labs, LABZ.com. Go check that out. It's a collaborative, creative process, but here's what the outcomes can be. The outcomes can be, if you don't want to go to a theater to see the release of a new movie, you could see it virtually on the same day it's released in the AMC theater. The Labs has the tech, and it's done securely, so it protects the economics for producers, directors, staff, cameramen, everybody that economically benefits from this. It helps them. And here's why that's important. Because we have so many people, of the millions of people who are out of work, many of them are in the entertainment business. They're gaffers, they're grip operators, they're camera operators, they're sound people, they're makeup artists. There are any number of people. In addition to the cast, the crew is there as well. And they want to go back to work. This is going to give them a shot at that. We're going to show you some examples of that next week. Well, we're also going to bring back somebody who was with me a few weeks ago, Tony Schumacher, of the Don Schumacher Racing organization. Tony's got a 6-race ride, and he's going to tell us who that is. It's different from who we had the last time he was here. He's going to be with us next Friday. and we're going to tape it. But he's going to talk about that new set of races. And what's even more interesting, he's going to be with a friend of mine who was my son's first mentor on the drag racing scene, and that's Mike Green. Mike is going to be a comeback story, I guess, with Tony, because they've worked together in the past. Mike Green's going to be the crew chief for Tony's ride for the 6 races to end the season. I'm very excited for both of them. Mike Green and one of the characteristics of Mike Green that I love is he is just stoic. If you watch the races, he walks up very calmly, very stoic, does a little turning of the screws on the manifold and all the stuff he needs to do, and then without almost expressionless, turns around, walks back, stands in a certain spot, boom, car takes off, and then he, regardless of what happens on the ticker, best time, win, lose, or draw. I think the best I've ever seen out of Mike was maybe a slight fist bump of excitement, maybe. But we're going to share that with you next week as well with Tony Schumacher. Oh my gosh. The virtual film premiere, we're going to have American Women, The Assistant. We're going to rerun that. That's going to be, it's going to be some great stuff. And I'll give you insights on how you can participate on all of those feature film shows on virtual platform. The Labs is the virtual platform. And I'm hoping that next Friday I'm also going to have the 2 writers and producers of a new film that's yet to be put in the can, as they say. But because of the way technology's offering us these opportunities, the Labs is going to present a full feature read of the script. So all the actors that are going to be in the film are going to read their script part, and they film those parts, and they put it together as though it's the film. This is pretty cool. So if you've ever been around putting together a film, whether it's on your iPhone or the big deal reel, this is cool. And on September the 10th, that's going to be a fundraising event to show that read of that script for this feature film. And it's a comedy. And you'll see some social media stuff come out from me this weekend and into next week. But I hope to have the writer, Chris Agano, and her co-author, Laura Carson, on the show with me next Friday before they kick this thing off on September the 10th. That's gonna be really exciting. The new technology just killer stuff. I'm hoping they're really busy. September's a huge month for the Labs. I may be able to get the founder on the show briefly to chat with us about the platform. But that being said, there's also an opportunity to perhaps get a Broadway production onto a virtual broadcast. Meaning this: let's say we take a theater off the top of my head, the Apollo Theater, and a Broadway production. Let me think about this. The Blue. The producer, Robert Moreland, and they decide to make the Apollo Theater their own bubble, so that all the cast and crew are there. They go through rehearsal, they do all their things, and then they're ready for the live Broadway production of it. But throughout that entire time, it was all in a bubble, constant checking. And during that time, they're filming everything they do. In fact, they're going to film the live broadcast production of The Blue. I'm not saying they are, I'm just hypothetically saying that maybe this can happen. But with the addition of the Labs, you can create pre-show the concession stands or the waiting room or the backstage fervor, and then you have a clock that prints off when it's going to show, and then all of a sudden for all the virtual viewers, it's a live Broadway show. And you're there for intermission, but you're sitting in your house. You get your own beverages. But here's what's really interesting. After the live Broadway production is done virtually, you get to participate in rooms that interview the stars and get reactions as if you're there for an after-show party. That's what's really cool. And that's not just for Broadway. That could be first release of a feature film. It could be for a concert. Can you tell I'm excited about the labs? I am. It's really, really interesting technology. And what's really cool about it, it's in the cloud. That in itself, along with AI and blockchain programming, for those of you who know, and I don't know as much as many of you do out there who are programmers and code heads, but I know enough that I feel good about how secure it is for the economics and validating the economics for each of the participants. Here's an example that I love to use. It's about musicians, because musicians, when they would collaborate with with production houses, you know, a studio musician goes in, plays their guitar, plays their skins, whatever they do, and they get paid their rate, right, for studio musician rate. And they don't really know what that participation in the songs they create is going to do. And too often, they don't necessarily want to bet on by signing away something in that moment, because they really don't know. And in some cases, people have been they've signed off on stuff and been left out. It was a way to kind of seclude them. Similar way scripts are bought and then shelved because a big production house wants to remove the competition of a better product. Well, the same thing happens with musicians. So musicians were kind of the impetus behind the labs doing what they're doing, so that they could protect the collaborative creative process and allow all the participants to be kind of clocked in and recognized by digital time stamping their contribution. So if a song goes platinum or a film goes, you know, global, viral, if you will, they're going to be part of that routine. The future of compensation for artists with these kind of collaborative creative tools is going to change the look of the land. You're going to have fewer middle people dealing with and manipulating the scenarios. I think it's a good thing. I think it's great. As I say that, I want to make sure that each of you are listening to what we do here at the KUHS, reminding you that we're streaming some of the best stuff you can ever imagine, and we're always getting better. So stick with us and be with us every day of the week if you can, but especially for my show on Fridays at 11 o'clock right here at KUHS Denver, streaming those images and views that make you better at who you are. And as I've just put up here, I want to emphasize again that the NBA, I think, has actually kind of surprised me as to the swiftness with which they responded to Doc Rivers, to LeBron James, and any number of athletes that have commented on what's going on and how they stood behind them with regard to their decision to boycott, and to begin with the end in mind. We're beginning with knowing the end in mind is to remove racism and to recognize that we have personal privilege to speak what we have to say about what is right and what is wrong. Too often, as I pointed out today, history had conflicts and there were changes that happened. But within that conflict, there were other things, there were other conflicts going on that were camouflaged by the change. Yes, all-black starting basketball team won an NCAA championship, but they didn't get a chance to be recognized nationally on Ed Sullivan. They weren't even given a ladder to cut down the net. That should have been spoken out against. All right, it was a first. From that point on, from 1965 going forward, the recruiting of black and athletes of color increased throughout the Southeastern Conference that Texas Western was in, and then all over the country, as is evidenced by when I played for Lute Olson. That was a change in the times. A lot of things were happening. But what's interesting to me, there was still way too much silence about white privilege and what that meant for families in the community. I'm asking you to begin with your end in mind and see what's out in front of you. Get your eyes open and your ears ready to hear what needs to be heard about the changes that need to be made to the conflicts that are right here in front of us. How much does it take for you to understand that something was not right when a man in front of his 3 kids was shot in the back 7 times? I don't care how hard-hearted you are. That's not a good picture. Something's not right. And that needs to be examined. That needs to be talked about. And not with platitudes or pointing fingers at others, blaming them for not doing something. It's 1 finger out and 3 fingers pointing back at you. So we all have to take ownership about this. It's a global issue about the violence and the unnecessary behaviors that are coming out in our communities worldwide, globally. Be aware of what is there. Take care of what you need to for who you are and what's right for you. Hey, I'm glad you're here today with me every Friday, 11 o'clock. Tune in next week. We got some great stuff going on. I'm going to tune in to McFadden and Whitehead. Ain't no stopping us now. Isn't that a poetic switch and change for the show today? Ain't no stopping us now.